Welcome to BizTech's Community Conversation Show. Now, this special show is part of our partnership with the Merdeka Awards 2022. Now, the Merdeka Award Trust was established by Petronas and Shell in 2007 to recognize and reward excellent individuals and organizations whose work and achievements have not only contributed to the nation's growth, but have also inspired greatness in the people of Malaysia. Now, our guest today is Chan Soon Seng. He's a Chief Executive Officer of Teach for Malaysia, the education and community recipient for the Merdeka Awards 2022. Now, Teach for Malaysia won the award for its work towards ensuring high-quality education in government schools, especially in rural and underprivileged communities. The organization believes that a child's education and future should not be determined by his or her circumstances in life. Now, to tell us more, we have Soon Seng. Welcome to the show, Soon Seng.
Thank you so much, Brian. It's good to be here.
Now, Soon Seng, for a start, could you just give us an overview of Teach for Malaysia and how the organization started?
Yeah, I think that when we think about education across Malaysia, really, we believe that education is really important. The government spends the majority of our national budget actually on education. But some of the challenges that we see is that the kind of education that our students today receive isn't necessarily setting them up for success in the future, and especially for students who come from underprivileged or rural backgrounds. And so we really believe that a child, no matter what their background, right, whether you're born into an urban community or whether you're born into a really rural community, no matter what your socioeconomic status, that you deserve the right to have a quality education, because we believe that education really enables students to live into their potential that they want for themselves. So Teach for Malaysia was started off just over 10 years ago by our co-founders Zamri Zulkifli and Kiran Sivaraja, and they really just had this idea that they wanted to bring passionate people into the education system to really serve the most underserved communities in the country. And like most good things in Malaysia, it started at a mamak conversation, and the rest is so they set up the organization, and the rest is history.
Now then, you've got an interesting journey as well, because you've grown up literally within this organization. How did you get involved?
Yeah, so like many Teach for Malaysia fellows and alumni, I came in, making this 2-year commitment. I was working as a management trainee in a financial services firm before I joined the fellowship, the Teach for Malaysia fellowship. And I told myself that I was going to do this for 2 years. I was going to contribute to the country and really make a difference in education, and then go back to a corporate job afterwards. I think that the reality of the 2 years that I experienced was something that I always tell people it was the most life-changing experience and the most challenging experience, but also the most rewarding experience. And as a fellow, I taught in a industrial community in Klang, and a lot of my students, well, the majority of my students came from low-income backgrounds, and I saw the challenges firsthand that they had to face, the things that they needed to overcome in order to just make it through the education system. I was an English teacher, and I taught Form 4, which means that most of my students were either 16 or 17 years old. And I had some students in my classes who were completely illiterate at the age of 16 and 17. And that to me was completely shocking. And
so how does that happen in the education system today?
Yeah.
Do they just get passed through year after year?
Yeah, I think that, that is one of the challenges, right? Like, I think that there are many students that slip through the cracks and don't receive the support that they need in order to keep up with what's going on. And that's not necessarily a factor or a fault of any one particular party. oftentimes, there are many factors that contribute to that. So you would have a kid, for example, who have parents who are illiterate. So you don't have the support at home to help them. They don't go to kindergarten necessarily. And so many of my students would have started on day one in school in standard one, already have being left behind by many kids in comparison to the other kids in their class. And the teachers in their class may not have had the adequate resource to be able to, number one, diagnose and differentiate the support to the varying needs of their students. And so then a kid would then be just passed on through the system, but not necessarily able to meet the needs or the requirements of what the curriculum sets out for their particular grade.
Okay, so and this is obviously a major issue, and from my exposure and experience, yours is not a unique case. There are many cases, and it's just across Malaysia. What are some of the other challenges that kids face, especially when they're trying to basically get an education, but then the home environment also then doesn't allow them to get a proper education?
Yeah, I think that the challenges are multifaceted, right? You may have many kids, like I said, you're already starting on the back foot when you come from an environment where you don't necessarily have a family that is literate or educated. And so what we've experienced is that typically most parents are extremely committed to their children's education, but they may not have the ability to support them. So number one, you don't have the parental or the family support that you need at home, not for lack of motivation, but just for lack of inability and opportunity.
Yeah, because a lot of times at a lower socioeconomic level, they're just trying to put food on the table.
Absolutely.
So they, as much as they want their kids to have a good education, they can't give them that time because they're probably spending 15 hours a day working.
Absolutely. And you see that kind of reinforces some of the challenges, because then oftentimes a lot of students that we've had to work with go on to work part-time after school, right? And so if you think about a child who comes from a background that is really supporting them to do well in their education, they typically would have after-school support in their studies or extracurricular activities. Many of the students from low-income backgrounds have to work to support their families. They're not spending that time doing homework or doing their extra studies. They may not necessarily be equipped. A lot of students, a lot of our teachers, myself included, I had to make sure that I always had a supply of pencils, a stationery, of books, because my students couldn't afford to buy that for themselves, right? And so there are many other factors. Students come to school hungry because they may not necessarily have enough food at home. They don't necessarily have the uniforms or shoes to come to school comfortably because they're sharing with their siblings. So there are many other challenges that affect how a student shows up to school before we even begin to think about the kind of support that they get within the classroom.
Now then, those are, and thank you very much for sharing, those are really important issues that face students really going through the education system. But now let's talk around the macro impact that Teach for Malaysia has had. Since you started, and as you said, it's the 10th year, what sort of impact have you had?
Yeah, so I think that the thing that we're always the most proud of, and the thing that anchors us in our work, is really the impact that we make with students. So across the last 10 years, through our fellows and through our teachers, we've been able to impact over 330,000 students across the country. So our fellowship program has placed in 10 states across the country, and our other core program Duta Guru, which we implement for Yayasan Petronas, has teachers in every single district across the country. So we're really proud of that impact. And what does that look like? 330,000 is a big number, but when we single it out to an individual student, what that looks like is students who had, for example, never imagined that they would go to university in their life, but then had the access and support to be able to figure out what pathways they needed to pursue, and were then supported with resource and scholarships to be able to get to university. So that's an example at the student level. But what what we've also seen is that what Teach for Malaysia is trying to develop is not just excellent teachers in the classroom, but people who really take that 2-year experience in the classroom and then go on to lead greater initiatives or innovations that are going to make impact across the system. So what we've seen our alumni do is, continuing to make impact with students. 72% of our alumni continue in education in Malaysia in some form or another. But beyond just the classroom and working with students, we have alumni that have now trained principals in Malaysia. We have alumni that train district education officers, and we also have alumni that have helped to shape national curriculum in Malaysia. So we believe that in order to transform education, it's not a single solution. It's multifaceted and it's multi-layered, and we need to see leadership across every layer of the system and from all sectors of society contribute. And we're very, very proud of the work that our alumni have done all across sectors.
Now, Soon Seng, could you share some success stories, perhaps, of some of your students that have perhaps come from disadvantaged backgrounds, who probably, as you said, never aspired, never even dreamed of just finishing SPM, let alone going to university, but you've helped them along the way and made an impact to their lives?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll share the story of 2 students. The first student that I love to talk about is Hajar. And so she was a student that had the privilege of having a Teach for Malaysia fellow or alumni teach her across her entire secondary school life. And so while she was in secondary school, she participated in an alumni initiative called Project ID that was all about helping students to identify what they were passionate about and how to pursue that. Hajar in high school or in secondary school never did particularly well academically. She was always a very strong leader in school. She was a prefect. She participated in extracurricular activities. She won archery competitions, but she wasn't the kind of student that was stringing together A's all the way, right? And typically with a student with a background like Hajar, accessing university and scholarships would have been particularly difficult for her to do that. But because of the partnerships that Teach for Malaysia has and the ability for us to give students opportunities, Hajar eventually went on to do a scholarship in Sunway College under the Sunway Teach for Malaysia scholarship. And in that time, she really discovered her passion for computer science, and then did really well in her diploma, and then is now in Korea under the Global Korean Scholarship from the Korean government on a full scholarship to study computer science in Korea. And so this is a girl from a B40 background, never really thought that, studying overseas, a university degree was a thing for her, and is today living out that aspiration. A quick other story is this story of Yugendran, who is a student from Klang, and he joined one of our alumni programs called Closing the Gap, which was all about helping kids to think about university access. Today, he is studying at Stanford University because of the support and access that he was provided through that initiative.
Those are amazing, inspiring, and in fact, I'm tearing. Just something that should inspire not only individuals but corporations to get involved with Teach for Malaysia. So let me ask you then, Soon Seng, how is Teach for Malaysia funded?
Yeah, I think we have the privilege to work with many, many partners and supporters, and we've had partners and supporters support us and fund us across the last 10 plus years that we have been around. So a key funder and supporter, for example, is Yayasan Hasana, the foundation of Khazanah National, and they supported us from the initial stages and have continued to support us across the years. And so we have many corporate funders and supporters like Yayasan Hasana, Yayasan Petronas, YTL Foundation, CIMB Foundation, Yayasan Harta Lega, the list goes on. We also are very, very privileged to have Malaysians, everyday Malaysians, contribute to Teach for Malaysia through personal donations. And we then obviously would not be around with the support of the Ministry of Education that has in the past funded us and also supported us to make sure that we're able to work inside government schools in the country.
Now, what are you've been in the organization for a decade, essentially.
Yeah.
You've grown up, as I said, within the organization.
That's right.
What are the accomplishments you think that you're most proud of at Teach for Malaysia?
Yeah, like I said, for us, it's the difference that we make in the lives of our students, right? And the ability to have worked with over 330,000 students in Malaysia is a massive feat that we're extremely proud of. Over the years, we have worked with over 1,000 fellows and teachers in the Ministry of Education, really developing their leadership to be able to make a difference with their students. And we're really, really proud of that number that we've been able to work with. But I think that what we think about when we look forward is if we truly want to see transformation in education, we believe that there needs to be so much more that's happening, and that we need to grow our impact in order to see in our lifetime significant change in education.
And how does this impact your organization, winning the Anugerah Harapan Merdeka Award in your category?
Yeah, we're extremely, extremely proud to have received this award for education and community from the Merdeka Awards Trust. And, you know, Teach for Malaysia, our vision for students, what we want to be true for them is for our students to be leaders of their own learning, their future, and the future of Malaysia. And when we think about the spirit of Merdeka and what that's about, right, I think a real big aspect of that is the ability for us as Malaysians to take ownership of our destiny, take ownership of our future, and to shape that future as a society. And so when we think about what we want to be true for students, and when we think about the spirit of Merdeka and the spirit of Malaysia, really, that's something that, you know, we hold really dear to our hearts. And so being able to be recognized through the Merdeka Awards is something that aligns so much for us and is such a huge privilege and honor for us to be recognized in this way.
Now, Soon Seng, what's next for Teach for Malaysia?
Yeah, you know, like I said, while we're really, really proud of all of the impact that we've made across the last 10 years, as we look forward, I think that what we feel like is we need to see more. There are still so many students who are disadvantaged, not just because of the general circumstances, but if we think about the last 2 years and the impact of COVID, in Malaysia, there were approximately 1.8 million students who did not have access to a device or connectivity of their own during the school lockdowns, when that was the key means in which students were learning. So as we've gone back into schools in person, as schools have reopened, what we're seeing is that the disparities and the gaps that were already present have widened even more than in the past. And a lot of the progress that we had made as a country has been set back in many ways. And we know that there are compounded and long-term effects of these education or school closures that we will face in the years to come, right? We may not see them in the immediate term, but when these kids enter the workforce, they're going to be significantly set back. So we feel that there's so much more that needs to be done, and that we need to grow the number of people that are really passionate and committed and equipped to work towards education transformation. So for us, the future or the way forward is really about how do we think about growth? How do we grow the number of teachers? How do we grow the number of students that we impact in order for them to ensure that they receive the education that they deserve?
Soon Seng, it's been an inspiring and informative conversation. And thank you very much for coming on the show. But before you leave, any final thoughts that you'd like to leave the audience with?
Yeah, I think that there are some of these very common sayings in education, right? Like it takes a village to raise a child. And what we recognize at Teach for Malaysia is that it's not about Teach for Malaysia as an organization that is going to transform education, but it is the commitment of the entire country. It's the commitment of all everyday Malaysians to make a difference. And so we would love to invite anyone who wants to contribute, wants to commit, wants to make a difference in education to get involved with Teach for Malaysia. And there are many ways that you can do that. You can sign up to be a fellow. You can commit 2 years full time of your life to make a difference directly in classrooms. You can also volunteer with Teach for Malaysia. We have many projects that our fellows and our teachers run that need the support of volunteers. And finally, you can also support Teach for Malaysia financially. And you can do that as an individual donor or as a corporate donor to Teach for Malaysia.
Now, thanks again, Soon Seng, for coming on the show.
Thanks, Brian. It's good to be here.
I'm Brian Fernandez, and we've been speaking to Chan Soon Seng, the Chief Executive Officer for Teach for Malaysia, on BizTech's Community Conversation Show. The show is in partnership with the Merdeka Award 2022. This video and podcast will be on our social media platforms as well as our website, www.biztech.asia. It will also be on our syndication partners via TV, radio, as well as social media platforms. Please subscribe and like our various platforms. Thanks again for tuning in.